It took me months to learn about microservices, and today I am going to teach you. Hi, I am Shayan, and I have been coding since 10 years, and now I am sharing with you how I created my microservices in Golang, how they communicate with each other, how Kafka works, how Kong API gateway works, and much more, all about microservices in just. Let's dive in. So first thing we will be doing is that we will be understanding how microservices work. So let's say we are creating a chat application that requires three three microservices. One is authentication, other is chat service, and the third is context service. Okay. Now what we'll be doing is what will happen is that they will all have separate databases, and this all are Docker containers. So let's add it here, Docker containers. And on the front, we have a Kong API that is also in the Docker container. So that also Kong API gateway. And this this is our other database. You can use any database, MySQL or Postgres. I will be using Postgres. One more thing that we will be using is Apache Kafka. And okay, now it how Kong API gateway works. What happens is that the client from the browser sends the request from the browser or mobile app, sends the request to the Kong API gateway. Kong API gateway, we configure the URLs like API slash v1 slash authentication, API slash v1 for chat, and API slash v1 for content. So how Kong API gateway works is that the client sends the request to one of these routes, and Kong API gateway, as it is in Docker container, so it can access other Docker containers through their container name, as container names in Docker containers become host names. So in Docker network. So what happens is that if the Kong gets the request on API slash v1, what happens is that we will be routing to internal Docker container that is authentication microservices. Let's say it is running on 4001 and chat service is running on 4002. Okay. After that, contact service is running on 4003. Let's say. So what will be happening is that the Kong API gateway will just be routing to our different API routes and containers. Okay. This was the main work of Kong API gateway. And now what will happen? Let's say we want to send the request to send the message to some contact. So what will happen is that chat needs the contact's information, and here to communicate between the microservices, we will be using Apache Kafka. So let's say we have Apache Kafka here. Here's how Apache Kafka works: is that it works on producer and consumer structure, producer and consumer structure. So here's, let's say we have different producers like this. can say producers. What Apache Kafka is basically is it is a message broker that takes the events from the producers, and the consumers consume the events from the Apache Kafka. So let's say the producer are producing the events and the consumers are consuming all the data they are producing. So in the same way, we will be creating our chat application. So what happened is that the chat application, the chat microservice will send the request to Apache Kafka with the event that it produce, like produce get contact info. Okay, it will produce get contact info event, and Apache the context will be consumer in this case. So it will consume that event, consumes event that is get contact info. After consuming, it will process the request from the database and then send the results back by producing an other event that may be called contact info. And in this case, the cat service will become a consumer, consumes that contact information, and it will take the desired values, like for example number, and send the message to that contact information, to that contact. So let's start with the coding part. Here I have just created an empty folder with the name of microservices. So here we will be creating different directories for different microservices. As you can see, we have created three directories for authentication, chat, and contact. Let's start with the contact one. And what we will be doing is just firstly running our code. Now let's run it. Working fine. Now let's create the make file. First thing we will be declaring is build command that will just build our executable file in whichever OS operating system you are. For example, I am using Linux, so it will create an executable file. Okay, after build, we will be creating a run command that will build first and then run our executable. So let's try it. Okay, so it's saying go.mode file not present. So let's initiate it. Now let's go mode ID. Let's make run. Okay, now it's working fine. And one thing is that I will add at the rate that will, like you can see here, that it prints the command. So when we add the at the rate, it just silences that, and that's okay. Now it's working fine. Now let's create an function that will be used to handle the function, because this will be an API that can be accessible from the outside. So as we said here that contacts will be running on 4003. So let's create that. we will create API function type. That will be API function, and it will take the writer http dot response writer and http dot request. You can name it R, and returns the error. One more type we will be creating is API error. It will not be a function, sorry. Uh, it will be a structure with message. Yeah. And one more, that is API response. Actually, we don't need API response as we will be passing anyway. So let's create a function that will be make HTTP. It will take a function of type API func and returns the function of HTTP func. And now let's return it, and we will be running error colon function that we have passed in with the writer and the response. If there is a if error is not nil, one more function we will write is write JSON. It will take a response writer, status that will be int, value of it will return an error, nil for. Let's write some headers here. First thing we will be doing is content type equal to application slash JSON. Second header can be access control headers, but I will not be adding here. So if needed, we will add it later. And one thing more, we can add write header to write the status and just return JSON.new encoder. It will take response writer and encode the value that we are passing. And if error is not nil, we will return or just write JSON. It will take the response writer. Status is the HTTP status at REST API something went wrong, or you can say bad, or let's keep it simple and something so that user knows that something is actually wrong. Now let's create a router. For router, we will be using Mux, Gorilla Mux. It's that simple. Just copy this line, just run it in your microservice, and then we will be using router colon include it. We will have to include it. For new router, after creating a new router, we will have to add handle func. So for example, this will be your route. So what will happen is here that after API v1 slash context, this route will be working. For example, if we say get info, or we let's say we have just slash, and slash will go get all the contacts database. So what we have to do is we have to call this and let's create a function that is same type of API func handle contact. And just pass the handle here as it's same as API func, so it will work fine. And now we have to do is http.listen and serve. First thing is address. So address, as we said, is 4003, and the second thing is router. So we pass that router. Let's try it by adding something here. Let's our dot method equal to get. Just write the JSON, and write JSON we have w for the response writer. Status will be a status okay, and the value, let's say we have let's create a map of and this for now, and it works. Let's try it with that. As you can see, it stopped at hello from contact service. This means that it is working fine. So let's go into Insomnia or any other. You can go into Postman or any other request, and I use Insomnia. That's it section, and let's request it. Okay. So what we have is HTTP localhost as we declared 4003, and currently we have only slash as it's directly connected to our server, so we will not be having any other API endpoint now, as we have not added the Kong API gateway. Okay, so it's working fine. Now let's create some other route. Let's say it's ID 9 star. Okay, this it's plus, sorry. Okay, now you can have that. We have two pins, but it goes to the same. So let's do it like this: handle contacts ID. Okay, we will get the variable from ID from our URL by doing this dot parse ID. Okay, and we will just write the ID here. This will be okay. Now let's run it again. Okay, now we have an ID. Okay, now we are getting the ID. So let's create a dummy data here so that we can have some functionality going on. So let's create app of string with an array of surface, and let's say we have text. And what we can do is we can have an ID in front of it. It's as its interface. We can do one more thing is we the type struct, and let's say it have name of string and number string. Okay. We will continue from here in next video. Thank you for watching.